Hello, boys and girls. Our reading assignment for today is to read a book and then tell what happens in the beginning, the middle, and the end. I'm going to read a book for you today, and I want you to see if you can guess what story I'm going to read. I guess you've noticed this bag sitting here. It has some things in it that go along with the story I'm going to read. See if you can figure out which story I am going to be reading by the things I have in my bag. The first thing I have in my bag is a napkin. Then I have a knife, a fork, and a spoon. You have any clues yet? The next thing I have is a plate. This is one of my favorite plates. It has Pocahontas and the little raccoon. I like this plate because it reminds me of the raccoons that come to visit my house every night. The last thing I have in my bag is my coffee cup. On the front it says, "There's no place like home." And even though we have to stay at home, isn't it nice that we get to stay at our favorite place because there really is no place like home? Does anyone have an idea of what my story is going to be about today? I'll give you one more clue. My story takes place in a town called Chew and Swallow. Oh, if you guessed that my story was Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, you got it right. Now I'm going to read the story, so you listen very carefully so you can tell me what happens at the beginning, the middle, and the end. We were all sitting around the big kitchen table. It was Saturday morning, pancake morning. Mom was squeezing oranges for juice. Henry and I were betting on how many pancakes we each could eat, and Grandpa was doing the flipping. Seconds later, something flew through the air, headed toward the kitchen ceiling. Look here. The dog ran right under Grandpa's legs and landed right on Henry. After we realized that the flying object was only a pancake, we all laughed, even Grandpa. Breakfast continued quite uneventfully. All the other pancakes landed in the pan, and all of them were eaten, even the one that landed on Henry. Would you have eaten that pancake? I wouldn't have. That night, touched off by the pancake incident at breakfast, Grandpa told us the best tall tale bedtime story he'd ever told. Across the ocean, over lots of huge bumpy mountains, across 3 hot deserts and 1 smaller ocean, there lay the tiny town of Chew and Swallow. In most ways, it was very much like any other tiny town. It had a main street lined with stores, houses with trees, and gardens around them, a schoolhouse, about 300 people, and some assorted cats and dogs. But there were no food stores in the town of Chew and Swallow. They didn't need any. The sky supplied all the food they could want. The only thing that was really different about Chew and Swallow was the weather. It came 3 times a day at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Everything that everyone ate came from the sky. Wouldn't that be nice? We could just go outside and get our food. Whatever the weather served, that was what they ate. But it never rained rain. It never snowed snow, and it never blew just wind. It rained things like soup and juice. It snowed mashed potatoes and green peas. And sometimes the wind blew in storms of hamburgers. This story's making me hungry. The people could watch the weather report on television in the morning, and they would even hear a prediction for the next day's food. When the townspeople went outside, guess what? They carried their plates and their cups and their forks, knives, spoons, and napkins with them. That way they would always be prepared for any kind of weather. If there were any leftovers, and there usually were, the people took them home and put them in their refrigerators in case they got hungry in between meals. The menus varied. By the time they woke up in the morning, breakfast was coming down. After a brief shower of orange juice, low clouds of sunny side-up eggs moved in, followed by pieces of toast, butter and jelly sprinkled down for the toast, and most of the time it rained milk afterwards. For lunch one day, frankfurters, already in their rolls, blew in from the northwest at about 5 miles an hour. There were mustard clouds nearby, then the wind shifted to the east and brought in baked beans. A drizzle of soda finished off the meal. Dinner one night consisted of lamb chops, becoming heavy at times with occasional ketchup. Periods of peas and baked potatoes were followed by a gradual clearing with a wonderful jello setting in the west. The Sanitation Department of Chew and Swallow had a rather unusual job for a sanitation department. It had to remove the food that fell on the houses and the sidewalks and the lawns. The workers cleaned things up after every meal and fed all the cats and dogs. Then they emptied some of it into the surrounding oceans for the fish and turtles and whales to eat. The rest of the food was put back into the earth so that the soil would be richer for the people's flower gardens. I know who would like to be sitting there getting ready to get some of that meat. Do you know who it is? Jasper. Life for the townspeople was delicious until the weather took a turn for the worse. The Chew and Swallow Digest spaghetti ties up town. Record-breaking pasta fall causes chaos. Oh my goodness, look how deep the spaghetti is in the street. One day there was nothing but gorgonzola cheese all day. The next day there was only broccoli, all overcooked. And the next day there were Brussels sprouts and peanut butter with mayonnaise. Poor little Floyd. Look, it says, "Happy birthday, Floyd." And he has to eat Brussels sprouts, peanut butter, and mayonnaise instead of birthday cake and ice cream. Another day there was pea soup for fog. No one could see where they were going, and they could barely find the rest of the meal that got stuck in the fog. The food was getting larger and larger, and so were the portions. The people were getting frightened. Violent storms blew up frequently. Awful things were happening. On Tuesday, there was a hurricane of bread and rolls all day long and into the night. There were soft rolls and hard rolls, some with seeds and some without. There was white bread and rye bread and whole wheat toast. Most of it was larger than they had ever seen bread and rolls before. It was a terrible day. Everyone had to stay indoors. Roofs were damaged, and the sanitation department was beside itself. The mess took the workers 4 days to clean up, and the sea was full of floating rolls. To help out, the people piled up as much bread as they could in their backyards. The birds picked at it a bit, but it just stayed there and got staler and staler. There was a storm of pancakes one morning and a downpour of maple syrup that nearly flooded the town. A huge pancake covered the school. No one could get it off because of its weight, so they had to close the school. That's just like us right now. We had to close our school too. Not because of a pancake, though. Lunch one day brought 15-inch drifts of cream cheese and jelly sandwiches. Everyone ate themselves sick, and the day ended with a stomachache. There was an awful salt and pepper wind, accompanied by an even worse tomato tornado. People were sneezing themselves silly and running to avoid the tomatoes. The town was a mess. There were seeds and pulp everywhere. Oh my goodness, I can just imagine being out in salt and pepper and it getting in my eyes and nose. The Sanitation Department gave up. The job was too big. Everyone feared for their lives. They couldn't go outside most of the time. Many houses had been badly damaged by giant meatballs. Stores were boarded up, and there was no more school for the children. So a decision was made to abandon the town of Chew and Swallow. It was a matter of survival. The people glued together the giant pieces of stale bread sandwich style with peanut butter, took the absolute necessities with them, and they set sail on their rafts for a new land. That reminds me of the Pilgrims, how they set sail for a new land too. After being afloat for a week, they finally reached a small coastal town which welcomed them. The bread had held up surprisingly well enough for them to build temporary houses for themselves out of it. You can see the houses, they're all made out of bread. Would you like to live in a bread house? The children began school again, and the adults all tried to find places for themselves in the new land. The biggest change they had to make was getting used to buying food at the supermarket. They found it odd that the food was kept on shelves, packaged in boxes, cans, and bottles. Meat had to be cooked, was kept in large refrigerators. Nothing came down from the sky except rain and snow. The clouds above their heads were not made of fried eggs. No one ever got hit by a hamburger again. And nobody dared to go back to Chew and Swallow to find out what had happened to it. They were too afraid. Henry and I were awake until the very end of Grandpa's story. I remember his good night kiss. The next morning, we woke up to see snow falling outside the window. We ran downstairs for breakfast and ate it a little faster than usual so we could go sledding with Grandpa. It's funny, but even as we were sliding down the hill, we thought we saw a giant pat of butter at the top. We could almost smell the mashed potatoes. So what do you think the giant pat of butter was? It was the sun coming up. And what do you think the mashed potatoes were? It was the big mound of snow, wasn't it? The end. I hope you like that story, and I hope you listen carefully, because now we're going to talk about what happened at the beginning, the middle, and the end of our book, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. Now, at the beginning of the story, who remembers what happened? Oh, I do. Grandpa was fixing pancakes for the boys and girls. The dog hit him. The pancake went flying up in the air and landed on Henry's head. Then, that night, Grandpa was thinking about the pancakes and the food flying, and he told his grandchildren a tall tale bedtime story all about the town of Chew and Swallow. In the middle of the story, he remembers what happened then. Oh, I remember that too. Grandpa told his grandchildren all about the town of Chew and Swallow, how the food came down. They never had to go to the store. They just had to take their plates and their cups and their glasses outside with them and catch the food. But then something went wrong. Do you remember what went wrong? The food started getting too big and too much, and everyone started having all kinds of problems with the food. The spaghetti piled up, people didn't get the right food, poor little Floyd wasn't able to have his birthday cake, and it kept going on until finally the town decided they were going to have to leave. So then they made boats out of the bread and peanut butter, and they floated away. Now, what happened at the end of the story? I know you remember what happened there. At the end of the story, the people landed in a new land. They made their homes out of the bread, and Grandpa told them that the people of Chew and Swallow never went back. Then the next morning it snowed, and the boys and girls went outside to sled, and they remembered the story because they said that the sun looked like a big pat of butter and the snow looked like mashed potatoes. Now you have fun reading a book at home, and you tell someone what happened at the beginning, the middle, and the end of the story. Bye-bye.